Hey guys, and welcome to Amygdala's Bane.
Today we're going to be talking about God knows what. Gule, what are we talking about?
It's not the horses. We're talking about bipolar disorder.
Bipolar disorder is basically when you are fluctuating between two extreme points in your mood. So you'll be going through extreme periods of euphoria, which we call manic episodes, and then extremely sad and depressive moods called depression, or more accurately with bipolar disorder, monopolar depression. The extent of how long these symptoms last for and how long these periods last for varies with each type of bipolar disorder. And then with bipolar disorder, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of misconceptions. A lot of us live with people who have bipolar disorder, and I think it's important to talk about what we can do to help them.
The word bipolar is kind of self-explanatory in the sense that it means two poles. So you have two ends of emotion. So you have manic symptoms and you have depressive symptoms. Manic symptoms are going to be in like your extreme high energy level emotions. So there will be a lack of, there won't, like your need to go to sleep will be less. So you could be on, say, 2 to 3 hours of sleep for a week and you won't feel tired at all. You'll feel really rejuvenated. There's also excessive talking and racing thoughts. You feel like you have a lot of energy and you feel really, really productive and really creative, and you feel like your head's exploding with these amazing ideas and nothing can stop you, and you're really impulsive. You usually, manic symptoms include impulsiveness, so you engage in risky behaviors. And it's said that when someone is experiencing manic symptoms, at first, it's kind of helpful in the sense that, you know, your productivity increases and you need less sleep. So in a way, you're more efficient, quote unquote. But soon enough, it progresses into more dangerous behavior. So like with impulsiveness, you engage in risky behaviors that could maybe endanger a relationship that you have. Or you could, for example, there was this one individual with bipolar disorder that I read about who changed their major because during their manic episode, they changed their major to philosophy. And when their manic symptoms died down and they shifted to their depressive side or just to their normal mood side, they regretted it because they didn't know how that was going to carry them into the future. It was just an impulse to try something new that came with the manic symptoms. And another element of manic episodes is also delusions and hallucinations. It's not necessary for everyone with bipolar disorder to have these, to have delusions and hallucinations with their manic symptoms, but that's one of the reasons that it's difficult to diagnose, because it's often confused with a type of schizophrenia called Schizoaffective Disorder. So schizophrenia is a disorder in which you lose touch with reality, basically. And it involves delusions and hallucinations. But those symptoms can also be present in bipolar disorder. Like, for example, there was this other individual that I read about who, during their manic episode, they thought that they were being called by an intelligence agency to stop an attack that was going to happen on Karachi. And it's like at that moment, the individual is really, really, really convinced that their delusions and hallucinations are real. When their manic symptoms die down, they realize how absurd it may sound that, you know, you're being suddenly called by an intelligence bureau to stop an attack on your country. But at that moment, it feels very real to them. And that's what makes it more difficult to deal with, because a person with bipolar disorder might not recognize that there is something wrong with the way they're thinking, like during a manic episode. There's also an inflated sense of, there's an inflated self-esteem. There was this one person who thought that they were smarter than all of their teachers and professors, and they dropped out of college because they thought that there was nothing else they could learn from there. And they were like, I'm going to start my own business, when they didn't have the resources or even the knowledge for how to do that. And that obviously caused a lot of problems for them. And yeah, basically that's what mania is. And it's really exhausting. And when a person shifts to the other side after their manic episodes die down, they have to deal with the consequences of those actions. Yeah.
Gole,
Yeah.
completely natural and not scripted question time. What's the difference between mania and hypomania?
Very smooth, Kazi. Very smooth. I like that. That was very smooth.
Very natural, very smooth,
Yeah.
like a normal discussion.
Yes, exactly. So hypomania is when you experience manic symptoms, but to a lesser degree, so with less severity. Hypermania will be with more severity. So hypomania might just include lack of sleep and maybe racing thoughts, but hypermania will include more impulsiveness and like a stronger sense of self-esteem and even less need to sleep and a need to move around constantly, maybe insomnia, and all that. So it's like a difference between the intensity of mania. Hypomania is less mania, and hypermania is more mania. So on the other side, you have depression, which is also called unipolar depression when a depressive episode is occurring. And its symptoms are similar to clinical depression, in that you have low energy levels, there might be more need to sleep or inability to sleep. There will be depressed mood, low self-esteem, sadness, loneliness, feelings of guilt, feelings of shame. To an extreme end, there might even be thoughts of suicide or dying. There will be a lack of interest in the activities that a person used to enjoy. And there will be changes in appetite. Either the person will eat too much or eat too less. So the depressive episode is basically like a full opposite of the manic episode because it's characterized by low energy levels instead of high energy levels.
I mean, also, if you're just talking about both of those things, I think it's more complicated than that, because if you look at it with that binary perspective, it's just looking at it through a lens of these people are being sad and then being happy. But that's really not how it manifests in some people. Some people might manifest those things separately. So even in a manic episode, might get they might not exhibit those things as happiness. They might exhibit those things as like anger or something. So it could be different ways of how people express those things. So I think that is important to mention too. Basically, what we're talking about in bipolar disorder is it's basically how we categorize bipolar disorder is how prevalent the symptoms are and how in what succession they take place. So we have three different types of bipolar disorder.
And the first is bipolar 1 disorder, which involves basically severe mood episodes from mania to depression. So you'll have hypermania episodes and you'll have depressive episodes. In between the episodes, it's possible to have just normal mood. And then there's bipolar 2 disorder. And the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 is basically that both of them involve shifts from mania to depression or depression to mania. But in bipolar 2, it will be, the person will experience hypomania rather than mania. So the manic symptoms will be to a lesser degree. They will be less severe. But the depressive episodes will still be as severe. And then there's cyclotimic. Apparently it's pronounced cyclotimic and not cyclotimic, which I think is insane. But cyclotimic disorder is basically, again, a shift between the two. But the symptoms are less severe. For mania, it's going to be hypomania, and the symptoms for depressive episodes are also less severe. And the shift between the two will be more frequent. So instead of spending maybe months having a depressive episode or weeks having a manic episode, it will be a bit more rapid than that and less long-lasting for each episode.
It's also really hard to just generally diagnose these things, because when we're talking about bipolar disorder, when you look at the requirements for diagnosing something like depression, just pure depression, not unipolar depression like we see in bipolar disorder, the requirements for that are that you're feeling that depressive moods for more than 3 months at a time, as opposed to bipolar disorder, where you are either rapidly flipping between those two ends of emotion, or you are less frequently but still not frequently enough to be categorized as depression. Or even then, if you are flipping in between with irregularity of depression. So let's say you switch your emotions after every 3 months. The diagnosis would then be categorized as depression based on the time that you go to the therapist or the time that you go to the psychiatrist. So based on your symptoms, if you're saying I've been feeling very upset for the past 3 months, you'd be diagnosed with depression rather than being diagnosed with bipolar. So my point of saying this is when you're getting this diagnosed, you have to be able to explain the entire chain of events. So saying I've been experiencing these symptoms for 3 months is less helpful to the psychiatrist or the psychologist, because in the psychiatrist's mind, if you were feeling those symptoms for 3 months and then he gives you the medication or he gives you talking therapy and then your mood suddenly shifts all of a sudden, that could be an indication that the help is helping, that it's helping you in an accelerated notion rather than it just being your disorder. So the psychologist could see that as it helping you, but instead of helping you, what's actually happening is that you have bipolar disorder and you're switching between two things. So we need to be really careful how we are defining things either way.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why it's so important to be aware of the symptoms and to be aware of the signs, so that the client and the psychiatrist or psychologist can work together to get a fuller picture, or as full of a picture as possible, of the disorder for a proper diagnosis. So looking at the statistics, bipolar 1 disorder is the most prevalent of the bipolar types, whereas cyclothymia is the least prevalent. And a reason for this could be that with bipolar 1 disorder, the mood shifts from manic to depressive. The episodes are really severe. So it's like hypermania and severe depressive episodes. So the signs are more evident and it would be easier to diagnose. But on the other hand, for cyclothymia, since the episodes are for a shorter duration and they're less severe, both of them are less severe in nature, it would be less easy to diagnose it. And because of the lack of severity of the symptoms, the individual might not be given the correct medication needed, such as mood stabilizers, and it could be easier to label it as mood swings. And since the duration for cyclothymia is shorter, if, say, someone has episodes that, if like a female has bipolar disorder and her episodes last for maybe a month, then it could be attributed to her period. It wouldn't be taken seriously. And just in general, I think that cyclothymia could be taken as just mood swings because the symptoms don't seem that severe. And it could just be taken as bad attitude sometimes, like the irritability and stuff that comes with manic symptoms could just be taken as anger issues or something. So I think that's what makes it harder to diagnose. And then you have, in the middle, you have bipolar 2 disorder, which is the second most diagnosed. And that could also be because the depressive symptoms for bipolar 2 disorder and bipolar 1 disorder have the same level of severity. But in bipolar 2 disorder, like I mentioned before, it's hypomania, so the manic symptoms are less severe. So it could be that bipolar 2 disorder could be misdiagnosed as depression because the depressive symptoms are more intense, rather than in bipolar 1 where both episodes are pretty evident.
It's also interesting because when we talk about how mental health and how we look at psychology generally, we look at in lack of better terms, we look at the epitome of perfection in happiness and optimism and being happy all the time. But what we need to realize is that being happy all the time that's not what a healthy brain looks like. That's not what a healthy brain goes through. That's not what a healthy human being is going through. You need what is healthy is to experience all your emotions. Being sad does not make you being sad sometimes does not mean you have a mental health disorder. Being sad sometimes is normal and being sad sometimes is healthy. So what we need to realize from this is that this image of this optimistic and constantly happy person, just constantly never being upset, that's not how human beings function. if that person is either repressing their emotions and then letting them out in later episodes, and then letting that out in something like seasonal depression or something, or those people are being forced to those people are being forced to close in those emotions. So you're having a patriarchal society where men are not being allowed to express their emotions of sadness, or being allowed to express their emotions, any kind of emotion really, in a prevalent way. So my point with saying all of this is we need to change the perspective that being constantly happy and being constantly optimistic is healthy. It's not healthy. We all have times in our lives where we need to genuinely feel upset, feel sad, because that is the spectrum of human emotion. We need to feel everything on the spectrum of human emotion. It becomes an The sadness becomes an issue when when it overlaps everything else, and that's true for everything. Even the happiness, when happiness overlaps everything else, it becomes an issue. As someone who lives with someone with bipolar disorder, or if anyone is living with someone with bipolar disorder, um, it's difficult to live with someone with bipolar disorder, as it's difficult to live with anyone with any kind of mental health disorder. Multiple reasons, as well as because there's not a lot of information about what these mental health disorders look like, especially in our society. So there's a lot of miscommunication that could happen. There's a lot of ill intent that could be unintentionally given to someone based on these things. And then even with a diagnosis, there could be people who attribute that to something else. There could be superstitious explanations for something, and then a person could try to help, but a person could try to help through means which are not which would not be helpful to most people. Someone could try to call an exorcism or something, let's say, if you're having an extreme manic or um, manic manic episode, and you are getting very, very irritable and your mood is going really up. Maybe someone thinks, I'm not trying to make fun of that person, maybe someone who has no idea how the psychological process works or what mental health is, or doesn't believe in those things, and they think in that moment what the most appropriate step to take is they should consult a spiritual guidance counselor or something like that to do anything like that. What my point with saying that is that if we just channel that energy into different sources, maybe we can help. It's interesting because in churches, and then just in the Christian belief, there in the Catholic belief, it's more prevalent as opposed to Protestantism. In the Catholic churches, you have this process of um, saying your of it's this process where you're in a booth with a priest, and talking you're talking to them about your sins. It's called confessing. It's called confession. So you go to a priest and then you talk about what what the sins you have done, and try to ask forgiveness for them. And in those scenarios, usually you also talk about what is bothering you in your life, what led up to those things. And then traditionally the priest gives you advice. The priest is telling you what to do. And then that's interesting because that is basically what the basis of um, psychotherapy is. Psychotherapy, that going to confession in church is just what psychotherapy is, literally just what psychotherapy is. And then we have similar things to that, where someone might consult a person in the mosque, or they might consider the Maulvi or someone like a Quran tutor as someone who they can confide in and someone they can talk to. And previously, spiritual leaders like church leaders and mosque leaders were the heads of scientific communities, were the heads of the scientific community. They were the heads of research. They were the most learned people in terms of actual science that was going on in those times. But unfortunately, spiritual leaders do not perform those roles anymore. Spiritual leaders do not train themselves in things that do not pertain exactly to what their belief systems are. So previously, where leaders or the Catholic Church or even mosque, where the people people in positions of power were learned on every topic so that they could retell that information. They were the teachers of their society. Unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. So what I'm saying is you're going to someone who is qualified in those things, and maybe those qualifications were previously held by those spiritual leaders, but they've transitioned to people who have specialized in those fields. So what we need to realize is that just because you're going to a therapist or just because you're going to someone for help or you're going to a psychiatrist, that does not mean that you are infringing on your belief systems or that is doing something against your belief systems. What you're doing is you're going for the appropriate help that is needed for you. The fact that um, going to the mosque and asking the Maulvi or something like that isn't helping you, or the fact that going to confession and the priest isn't giving you advice that makes you feel better, that you shouldn't feel shame in the fact that your belief systems are being attacked. You should feel that the system has changed in this point of modernity. We've moved away from spiritual leaders specializing in those fields, where we have different people who are specializing in those fields and who I think if you ask for help won't diminish anything in terms of what your faith looks like. And generally, this is what we need to talk about when we're talking to parents or talking to support systems. What we need to realize is that for a lot of people, going to a psychologist or going to a psychotherapist is questionable, and they don't believe in those things, and they think it's infringing on the power of religion, or they're saying, well, why are you going to these things if you can pray or if you can do something else? And of course, those things can help. It's in psychology, praying and reading mantras or something similar, those things can help you because those are repetitive motions, and it's psychologically proven that if you are speaking to a higher power or you are speaking to someone, you're still speaking to someone, you're letting your emotions out. So that's a very healthy way of letting your emotions out. But there's nothing wrong in saying that that's not enough, or you feeling like you need more to feel better. I don't think that's infringing on anyone's belief systems, and that's important for parents to know as well. And then when we're talking about support systems, it's very difficult, especially if you don't have any idea what your child or what your parent is going through, especially if your parent is going through something like bipolar disorder. Obviously they are your guardians, and you cannot obviously they're your parents, you're not going to tell your parent to go to therapy or something like that. But in those situations, especially because parents are in charge of the home, you also need to take care of yourself, especially if the manic episode is quite severe, where you need to step in and you need to have another adult there to be able to take control of the situation. Where if the person is, let's say the father has bipolar disorder and the father is the main decision maker in the home, where the father is having a very extreme manic episode and they're having hallucinations or they're having delusions of grandeur, and let's say they're saying, okay, let's move out of this house, let's go buy a mansion, we'll take a loan. There needs to be another adult in the room who can say, that's not healthy, your brain isn't in a healthy place, you're going through delusions, we can't do that. So unfortunately, if the person is in a position of power like your parent or any kind of guardian figure, you need to inform someone else, your aunt, anyone. You need to inform someone what's going on with them. And then if you have a system where they can get help, they should be able to get that help. And then this isn't prevalent in Pakistan, but unfortunately it's even more complicated, because if you report those things to the authorities, or if social services find out that your parents have extreme bipolar disorder or your parent has extreme manic episodes, you could be put into the foster care system. If you are, especially if that's a lone guardian, if you have a single parent who has bipolar disorder and extreme manic episodes, you could be put into foster care, or you could be put into an orphanage based on the fact that your guardian isn't able to properly care for you, or you don't have any other guardian in your family who can take care of you. So there are lots of different things that you need to consider when you're going through this. The main point here is that the person who is suffering from bipolar disorder, they need a lot of help, and we need to support them through that help. But again, we help everyone, but that comes second. You have to take care of yourself first. If you're in a household where someone has these manic episodes and they're doing things which are infringing on your ability to live, or they're taking steps which are taking away all your resources. If you're sharing resources and they're taking away all your resources, and those steps, you need to be a little bit self-serving, and you need to say, okay, you need to be able to accept that you're coming first in those situations and coming to step in. And then let's come to the second scenario. The second scenario is that either a child has bipolar disorder or someone that you are taking care of. Let's say it's a worker, let's say you're a boss and it's a worker, something like that. So there are multiple steps. First of all, we need to talk to the person about what they're feeling. We need to look at what their symptoms are, especially if you're trying to support that person, where we don't have enough information as to properly assert ourselves. So let's say we look at our child, and then based on their mood for a few months, we think they have depression, but in reality they have bipolar disorder. We need to be able to educate ourselves on these topics so that we can be able to identify what our child is going through or what someone's child is going through, and then take the appropriate steps needed for those things, especially with those large manic episodes and maybe that extreme irritability. It could be categorized as a behavioral disorder, or it could even be categorized as a parent or a teacher saying that this student is unruly, or this student is not a good fit for our classroom, or this student or my child is not acting in a way which is acceptable for our home or for the school. And there are lots of things we can do to support that person. First of all, as a parent, you need to be able to have open conversations with your child. You need to talk about, if you are in a position where you can talk about how your child is feeling, talking about maybe there's a trigger in their manic episode. There's a trigger that's making them that upset. Maybe there's something in your home that's making them that upset. Maybe it's a certain sound. Maybe it's a certain food. It could be anything. So you need to talk to your child about what their triggers are for those things, and you need to talk about what the appropriate steps are to help someone. And then, like I was talking in the previous episodes, sometimes the best way to help someone is to recognize that their comfort zone is the toxic place for them. So sometimes it's best for us, and this is a decision that the parents needs to take, that if someone is constantly depressed and they're saying, what makes me feel better if no one talks to me, if I'm all alone in my room, I don't want to eat food, that makes me uncomfortable, I don't want to do that, then for you as a parent, or for you as a guardian, or for you as a protective figure, it's your responsibility to be able to recognize that their place of comfort is what is harming them, and they need to be taken out of that rut. And then especially with manic episodes where we're just looking at extreme inflation of ego or extreme happiness, that could be categorized as the parent seeing let's say an extroverted fling of the student, where they're like, oh, it's helping, they're getting better, but they're not recognizing that's actually, that inflated ego and that extreme happiness is actually part of the problem. And then going to therapy is complicated because it's difficult because there are lots of different types of therapy, and then there's also psychiatry. So there's lots of information, and then it is very easy to get confused. There's talk therapy, there's psychotherapy, there's social therapy, there's family therapy, you could have child parent therapy, you could have multiple other things. You could have cognitive physiotherapy, you could have training sessions, you could have mental health sessions where they're just talking, they could give you lots of different tests which could stimulate your brain to make you feel better. And what my point with saying all of this is that all of that is very complicated, and it's very complicated where obviously in Pakistan we don't have access to all of those resources, but when you do have access to all those resources, it's really complicated for parents to be able to know what resource they need to go to. And for that, you need to be aware of what exactly each therapy is offering. So when we're talking about cognitive therapy is very specific to it involves normal talk therapy, but it's very specific, changing the patterns of thought in your brain. So it's very specific about what the patient's pattern of thinking are, and trying to adapt those patterns into a more healthy fashion, as opposed to talking therapy, which is just based upon Freudian theory, which is if you're talking to each other, and then if you're if you're able to identify the issue, then you can talk about the issue, then you can try to help someone. And then with bipolar disorder, it's very common for bipolar disorder, people who suffer from bipolar disorder, to be able to go to a psychiatrist. And what you need to do is, as a parent or someone who's supporting that person, you need to be able to support a person no matter what decision they're taking. And then you need to be able to. I think it's important to consult a psychiatrist regardless of what you're going through, and then a parent or a friend or whatever the person is comfortable being there with them, so they can hear the diagnosis and hear what medications they're going through. And then when we're talking about medication, we don't really know a lot about the brain, and the medication can have a lot of effects and can have a lot of side effects that we don't really know about either. So let's say you're taking a mood stabilizer, and you're gaining, and then a side effect of that is a lot of weight gain. So let's say you're taking mood stabilizer and your child is, I don't want to take this medicine anymore because I'm gaining a lot of weight. I look ugly. I don't want to take this medicine. In that moment, you need to be able to be there to support them. You need to say, okay, well, it's just part of the process. You need to finish your prescription. And then look at what the effects of those medicines are, and then look at how long that weight gain lasts, and look at if that weight gain is a temporary part of that medicine, or if there is a substitute for that medicine that doesn't have that effect, but also doesn't have an even more harmful side effect. So as a parent, or as anyone who's in charge of someone, or even as a friend, it's very important that you research this topic very thoroughly. There are lots of even in Pakistan, you can ask me and Gule, you can ask the psychologist in your school. Even if you have the phone number of someone who is a psychologist or a psychiatrist, they won't take any money, and they will almost 100% respond to you. If you ask them, what does bipolar disorder look like, or you ask them, I think my friend has bipolar disorder, could you talk to me about what the medicines look like, or what each of these things look like? So those resources, even in a place like Pakistan, are available to you. You need to research what those places are. You could go to Therapy Works in Islamabad, and they could give you all the information that is related to bipolar disorder. And again, this is a theme through all mental health disorders. It isn't the responsibility of a person suffering with mental health disorder to explain themselves to you. It's your responsibility to be able to accommodate yourself to what they need. It isn't the person with bipolar disorder's responsibility to explain to you what they're going through. It's your responsibility as someone who cares about them, or someone who's living with them, to be able to educate yourself and then portray yourself in a way that's healthiest for them. And then when we're looking at family support, just generally, we're looking at lots of different things that can help someone. And then we have different levels of what a friend can do. I mean, yeah, Gulle is, when we're talking about friends, what do you think we can do when we're talking about friends? As friends, what can we do to help someone?
Well, as a friend, of course, it's important to do the research first. It's similar to some of the things that you already said, where you should research the symptoms that you think your friend might have, and if there's like a psychologist in school or something, you could consult with them as well, your concerns. But I think it's important that when you you also talk to the friend or the person that you're concerned about, how they're feeling, and so that you can maybe get a better idea. Don't say it directly outright. I think you shouldn't say directly outright what you think that they have straight away. Maybe just talk to them and ask them how they're feeling to gain a better understanding of what their other symptoms could be. And then doing the research according to that, you talk to them and say, I'm kind of concerned. I think you should consult someone because, give your reason. You could say, because I feel like there are some times when you get extremely irritable or angry.
Okay, so let's say you have a friend and you're talking to that friend, and you're noticing that they might have symptoms of bipolar 1 or bipolar 2 or even cyclothymia. if you've researched on it and then you know what you're talking about. Let's say that you feel that your friend has one of those symptoms, but when you're talking to your friend and they're talking, and you say that, well, I think you should try, I think even if you have a school psychologist or something similar, you say, okay, I think you should go to a counselor, or I think you should go to a psychotherapist, and they disagree with you. They're saying, I don't think that's important. I don't believe in that stuff. That mental health stuff isn't important. And then that's a very real thing. That's not even in our socio-economic bracket, and even with people in our own school, I think lots of them would not accept mental health problems as valid. What are the things we can say to someone who doesn't think mental health problems are valid, to convince them that they might need help?
Well, that's really complicated, because it might because confronting anyone about any kind of mental health problem that they might have will result in anger or denial, mostly anyway, because they don't want to accept that they have a problem like that, especially in our society where there's so much stigma with that kind of stuff. And they might just take it as, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't think there's any problem. I just feel happy and sad. Because it's said that like a lot of people with bipolar disorder won't accept that they suffer from bipolar disorder, because they'll just be like, I just get happy sometimes and sad sometimes like everybody else. When really that's not the case. It's much more severe than that, and it's not the same. But I guess all you could do is really try to educate them, try to show them, like maybe like how you would make a case if you thought that a friend needs to go to the doctor. You make the same case if you think that they need to go to a therapist. So you mention the symptoms that you're seeing, and you mention maybe the statistics so that they don't feel that strange about it. Maybe mention like this many people around the world also suffer from the same disorder. That might help. I've had a friend who I've had to talk into getting help, and they said that it helped them to hear the statistics and hear that it's not that uncommon, or it's not that abnormal, quote unquote, to have a disorder like that. And just educate them and try to tell them that these are the symptoms, and this is how it might affect you later on. These are some of the instances where I've seen it affect you that you might not have noticed, and just express, you care for them and you support them and you want to help them. That's why you're telling them all of these things, rather than just to rather than to put a stigma on them, because they might get defensive about that and be like, you just want to label me in a certain way. I don't know why you would want to do that to me. And you need to make them understand that you're not doing anything to them. You're just trying to help them understand how they're acting, because they might not be able to identify it themselves. And they should talk to an adult. Of course, this should be someone that they consult so that they can get the help that they need, because whether they agree with it or not, they do need that help. So it is kind of complicated to understand where that line is, where you have to cross that line and talk to an adult without, even if they don't want you to, because it's more important in that instant for them to get the help that they need, rather than them give their approval for you to talk to someone. So that's always...
And I think it depends on your friend as well, like who your friend is and what they respond to. I think, at least what I've noticed in Pakistan, is that a lot of that reluctance comes from a fear that if you go to therapy, I think a lot of that fear comes from the invalidation of your belief system. I honestly think in Pakistan, a lot of people aren't going to therapy because they feel their belief systems are going to be attacked or something.
Yeah.
And then as someone who believes the same thing or they do, or as someone who is closely believes something that they do, you can explain that we believe in the same thing, and it's not written anywhere, or there's no mention that having any of that type of help would infringe on your belief systems or make your prayer or make anything else less valid. Of course that can help you, but it doesn't make you a bad person, and you shouldn't feel ashamed of that not being enough for you.
Yeah,
I think that's important. And then
if you have like a headache, you're gonna take a Panadol, and you can also pray for the headache to go away. But you won't, in most cases at least, you won't just pray for the headache to go away. You will take a medicine. So taking medication for bipolar disorder or going for therapy for bipolar disorder is the same as that. So and it doesn't really, like you said, infringe upon your faith or your beliefs. In the case of, like, if you take Islam, for example, it's actually written that, like, if you take the scripture, it's actually written that you need to help yourself before you can get help from Allah. And if that's what you're concerned about, then follow what's written, because that's what's written. You need to help yourself if you want to get help through prayer as well. It's not just praying and doing nothing. It's doing something and praying at the same time. So saying your prayers doesn't mean that you can't take medication. There's no shame in taking medication or going for help or going to therapy.
Mm-hmm. And then when we're talking about trying to convince parents of someone to get therapy, that's also complicated, because obviously your parents would want to be like, why can't I help you instead of a psychologist helping you? Or if you're just talking to someone, why can't I talk to you?
Yeah,
but what we need to realize is
they're not qualified. That's what
exactly.
to make them realize is that they're not qualified. Just like if you were sick, they would not be qualified that you would tell them about how you're feeling sick, and then they diagnose you with, oh, you have this problem for physical problem. So the same applies for mental health problem. Yeah, they're your parents, and of course they want to help and they want to support you, but you have to make them realize that the best help and support they can give you is to let you talk to a professional who is qualified to give you the most support that you need.
And then with parents, I think, and especially when we're talking about therapy is expensive. I mean, it is expensive. It's, especially when you're going to therapy, like, let's say once a week, it's going to probably be more expensive than a normal doctor. If you go every week to therapy, it's probably going to be more expensive. I think in Islamabad, it's like, what are the prices usually? It's like,
good therapists that I've heard of are like 4,000 per session. There are a few that are 2,000 per session, but there are less available that charge 2,000 rupees per session. Most good therapists that I've heard of charge around 4,000 per session, which is obviously expensive if you go
a lot.
It is a lot.
If you go every week, and then maybe you're going maybe you're going multiple times a week.
Yeah.
Maybe you're going multiple times a week because you have something more prevalent. So we're talking about in tens of thousands of rupees per week, and we're talking about lakhs and lakhs over a period of months. And that's reality. And that obviously if someone even believes in therapy and they're willing to go to therapy, obviously that price point is something that we need to consider. And then while looking at that, there are also alternatives that are free. There's sometimes there's apps like 7 Cups, and then 7 Cups has sometimes trained psychologists who sometimes talk to you for free. You have some, if you have international call minutes, you can actually call the US services and the Canada services. You can actually call those international numbers. If you have those international minutes, you can actually still talk to those people. And I think some of them will take your calls. Do your research based on, I'm not sure about the international call numbers. I know there are some who will take internationals, but not all take internationals. So you should check your information with that. And then if you're graduating this year and going to university, almost every single university, even in Pakistan and abroad especially, there will not only be a psychologist teaching you psychology, like in the class, like normal A levels. There will be a special department just for mental health counseling and psychology. So if you're at a point where you can go to university or you've graduated, there is almost assuredly one department in your. I am 100% sure there's one in NAST, and I'm 100% sure there's one in LUMS, where there is a separate person over there who just looks at therapy. So you do have some free alternatives, and even in school, you might be lucky enough to have a psychotherapist in your school. There's a possibility. If someone is teaching you A-level psychology, they're already probably they're already qualified enough to give you at least a baseline of psychotherapy. They probably don't have, in Pakistan we don't have the certification either way. So in Pakistan, they're qualified either way. We don't have that kind of certification over here. So they're qualified either way to give that therapy. So even if you're just talking to your psychologist in your school, it would be helpful. You could talk to people you trust. Of course, people you trust may not have the best information, but sometimes it just helps to talk to someone just generally. And then we're going to have other types of social therapy. You have insomnia therapy, and you have insomnia therapy as well, which is obviously for insomnia, which is not to be confused with sleeping medicine. That is not medicine. That is therapy. It's therapy to help you to be able to sleep. It's not psychiatric medicine. And then of course you have psychiatric medicine. In psychiatric medicine, you have three different types of things that a psychiatrist can give you. You have mood stabilizers. You have what was the other one, Gule?
Antidepressants and antipsychotics. Also,
Anti, antipsychotics. You have mood suppressants, and then you have antipsychotics. And then the thing with antidepressants are there's a slight controversy around antidepressants with bipolar disorder, because of course antidepressants have you have to take antidepressants in time periods, and then if those time periods are off with what your prescription is, you still have to finish your prescription based on what the doctor is telling you, of course. So it's less medically accepted to take antidepressants for bipolar disorder. When we're talking about mood stabilizers, usually what we're talking about is lithium. So what that does is it makes you more calm. It makes your emotions less prevalent. And then when we're just talking about the chemical imbalances in your brain, we're not 100% sure as to why something like bipolar disorder would arise. But what we're basically looking at is a imbalance of chemicals inside your brain. So when we're looking at a euphoric period of mania, we're looking at an overabundance of serotonin. And then the neurotransmitters in your brains are firing at way past what their capacity is. So what you're going to feel is this extreme euphoria. So what that is akin to is like taking drugs. That's exactly what drugs do. Drugs give you this sudden rush of euphoria. So they do exactly what is happening in bipolar disorder. They give you this sudden rush of happiness that lasts for a while. Of course, drugs are temporary, but in your brain, that the production of serotonin is happening constantly while you're having a manic period. And then the opposite things when you're having a depressive period. Serotonin is not being formed in your brain. Your brain is not recognizing things that are happy. So that's what's happening in your brain. And what we're looking at through medicine is that basically the psychiatrist is trying to balance both of those things out at the appropriate times. And obviously that's hard to categorize.
yeah, and like there are so many complications with bipolar disorder, there are also a lot of complications in general with any mental health problem. And I think it's important to remember that, and it's important to be empathetic and try to be understanding and be patient with anyone who you think might be suffering from a mental health problem or is suffering from a mental health problem. It's important to give them their time to accept it, and it's important to get them the help that they need and help them stay consistent with the help that they need, especially for if you take bipolar disorder, it's important to make sure that if the individual has gotten medication, they need to stay consistent with their medication, because in their manic episodes particularly, they might feel so elated that they might feel like they don't need to take the medication anymore, which will of course only lead to a recession and going back to the symptoms that are stabilized by the medication. So it's important to be supportive and be there for anyone who has any kind of mental health problem, and to give them a safe space so that they feel comfortable discussing their problems, and so that a fuller picture of their experience can be created, so they don't have to hide anything or feel shame for a mental health problem, because no one should feel shame for that kind of thing. And yeah, that's basically it. Just try to be more empathetic, try to do more research if you think someone has bipolar disorder. And just educate yourself and educate them and try to support them in the best way possible. That's it for today's episode, and we'll see you guys next week.